The dense forest stretched endlessly under the moon's silver glow, its shadows deep and eerie. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the whispers of unseen creatures echoing through the towering trees. A lone figure stumbled through the undergrowth, his breath ragged, his vision blurring. His body burned from the inside out, a slow, creeping death coiling through his veins. He didn't know how it had happened. One moment he had been exploring the wilderness, the next, a sharp sting pricked his neck. A dart? A bite? He couldn't tell. But soon after, the world became distorted, and the poison began to take hold. His limbs grew weak, his thoughts fragmented. He collapsed onto the cold, mossy ground, struggling to draw in air. His heart pounded heavily, a desperate rhythm of survival. As darkness threatened to consume him, movement stirred nearby. A soft rustling of leaves. Presence. He wanted to call out, but his lips barely parted. His body was shutting down. He was dying. A shadow loomed over him, feminine in shape, with a strange, almost ethereal glow surrounding it. Then warmth. A gentle touch traced the side of his face, brushing through his damp hair. His failing vision caught the glint of golden eyes, large and luminous, filled with something oddly tender. She was not human. Her skin shimmered under the moonlight, a deep, rich shade that seemed to shift between blues and purples, an unnatural beauty unlike anything found on Earth. Waves of thick, silken hair cascaded over her shoulders, hues of deep violet and silver entwining like a cosmic dance. Her figure was curvaceous, soft yet strong, wrapped in a garment that seemed to pulse like living fabric, clinging to her like a second skin. She studied him, a flicker of concern crossing her delicate, exotic features. Then, without hesitation, she knelt beside him. His breath hitched as she moved closer, the warmth of her body radiating against his frozen skin. She cupped his face with gentle hands, and though her touch was unfamiliar, it soothed him in ways he couldn't explain. Her lips parted, revealing the faintest hint of elongated canines. A deep hum vibrated through her chest, a sound unlike any language he had ever heard. It was melodic, hypnotic. Then, she shifted, moving so that she was cradling his head against her, pressing him against the soft swell of her chest. He would have flinched if he had the strength. Then warmth, a sudden trickle of something thick and smooth against his lips. A rich, almost sweet liquid, tasting of something indescribable, like nectar and stardust, warm and intoxicating. Instinctively, his lips parted, and the substance flowed into his mouth. The moment it touched his tongue, fire coursed through his veins, but it was not the burning agony of poison. This was different. It spread through him like liquid sunlight, pushing back the darkness, igniting every nerve in his body with a rush of life. His body trembled. His heart thundered. The pain dulled, replaced by an overwhelming warmth. His breath came easier, his vision sharpening. Strength returned to his limbs, though they felt foreign, as though something inside him had changed. She watched him carefully, her golden eyes searching his face, waiting. His pulse still raced as he met her gaze, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The poison, it was gone. He could feel it. His body no longer ached, no longer fought for survival. But something else had taken its place. An unfamiliar sensation curled in his chest, a pull he had never experienced before. His skin tingled where she had touched him, as if his very essence was reaching for her. A bond. Connection. It was undeniable. She tilted her head, as if sensing his thoughts. Then, in a voice like velvet and whispered starlight, she spoke. "You are healed." Her words were slightly accented, foreign but understandable. The sound of her voice sent a shiver down his spine. He swallowed hard, his throat still thick with the remnants of whatever she had given him. What did you do to me?" Her golden eyes studied him intently before she finally answered. "Saved you." Her hand brushed over his chest, right above his heart. The touch sent a jolt of something sharp yet pleasant through his body. His skin burned under her fingertips, but not from pain, from something else entirely. He struggled to sit up, his body feeling both lighter and heavier at once. He was different now. He knew it. Something in him had changed. He could feel her presence in his mind, not as words, but as a sensation, a warmth that pulsed in rhythm with his own heartbeat. His breathing was uneven as he met her gaze again. "Who are you?" She hesitated, then whispered a name that felt like a breeze through the stars, soft yet powerful. A name that was impossible, yet it settled in his mind as though it had always been there. She was not of this world. That much was clear. But why had she saved him? And why did he feel like, in doing so, she had entwined something between them, something neither of them could undo? She exhaled softly, her fingers trailing away from his skin. He immediately missed the contact. "You are not the same," she murmured, her voice laced with something unreadable. He frowned. "What do you mean?" Her gaze darkened. "My kind, we do not give our essence lightly." She hesitated, then continued, "What I have given you is more than just healing." He could already feel it, the invisible thread tying them together. It was more than gratitude, more than survival. It was something far deeper, something irreversible. And as the night stretched on, he realized his life would never be the same. The night air felt heavier than before, charged with something unseen, something unspoken. He could feel it lingering in the space between them, an invisible thread binding them in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. His body still hummed with the warmth of her touch, the lingering taste of her essence on his lips, both foreign and intoxicating. She watched him with those golden eyes, her expression unreadable, but he could sense something within her, hesitation, curiosity, and something deeper that mirrored what was unraveling inside him. His fingers pressed against his chest where the poison had once ravaged him. But now, there was only heat, a lingering pulse of energy unlike anything he had ever felt before. It wasn't just healing, it was something far greater. "You feel it, don't you?" Her voice was a soft murmur, like the whisper of wind through unseen worlds. He swallowed, his throat still thick with uncertainty. "I do," he admitted, though the words felt inadequate. "But I don't understand it." Her lips parted as if to explain, but then she stopped, her gaze flickering to his hands. He followed her stare and froze. Faint traces of luminescent lines pulsed along his veins, barely visible beneath his skin, glowing and fading in rhythm with his heartbeat. It was subtle but undeniably there. "What did you do to me?" His voice was hushed, almost afraid to disturb the fragile moment hanging between them. She lifted her hand, hesitated, then pressed her palm against his. A spark jolted through him at the contact, an instant rush of warmth, connection, awareness. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. He inhaled sharply, his entire body reacting to her touch in a way that went beyond physical sensation. Her eyes met his, searching, testing. "You are connected to me now." He felt the weight of those words settle over him, heavy with meaning he didn't yet grasp. His instincts told him she was telling the truth, even if it made no sense. "Connected how?" His voice was lower now, edged with something raw. She exhaled slowly. "My kind, we do not heal without consequence. What I have given you, it is more than simple restoration. It is a part of me." His heart pounded. "You mean, I have bound you to me?" The confession was quiet, yet it rang louder than anything else. "Not by choice, not entirely, but it is done." His pulse roared in his ears. He felt it, her presence in his mind, in his soul, in the very rhythm of his heartbeat. It wasn't just an awareness. It was her, as if she had left a piece of herself inside him, something permanent, something alive. His breath came faster, his mind racing to grasp the enormity of what had happened. "Is it dangerous?" She considered his words for a long moment. Then, with the slightest shake of her head, she whispered, "No, but it is irreversible." The reality of it struck him all at once. His body wasn't just his anymore. His thoughts weren't just his. There was something foreign within him now, something that belonged to her. But the strangest part? He didn't fear it. If anything, The bond between them was pulling him closer, tightening around him like an unseen force. The longer he sat near her, the more he felt it growing, intertwining their very essences. He should have been terrified. He should have been questioning everything. Instead, he found himself mesmerized. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, ever known. Her beauty was otherworldly, but it wasn't just that. There was something else, something in the way she carried herself, both powerful and hesitant, both fierce and vulnerable. And the more he looked at her, the more he felt it. The pull. As if he had known her in another lifetime. As if something deep within him had been waiting for her all along. She shifted, the movement drawing his attention to the curves of her body. The way her form was both impossibly soft and undeniably strong. She was built like a goddess sculpted from the cosmos itself. Yet she regarded him with cautious curiosity, as if uncertain of what their connection meant. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, her voice softer than before. "Does it frighten you?" He met her gaze, his pulse still uneven, his mind a whirlwind of questions without answers. And yet, "No," he murmured. "It doesn't." A flicker of surprise crossed her features, quickly masked. She studied him as if trying to decipher the truth behind his words. He hesitated before asking, "Does it frighten you?" For the first time, something vulnerable touched her golden gaze. "Yes," she admitted. The honesty in her voice settled deep within him. She wasn't a creature of deception. He could feel that now. Whatever bond had been created between them, it was raw and real, unfiltered. And it wasn't just affecting him. She was feeling it too. The realization sent another shiver down his spine. Whatever had been set into motion, neither of them could escape it now. His fingers flexed against his palm, remembering the heat of her touch, the way his body had responded to her nearness. It wasn't just a connection of minds or souls. It was something deeper, something more primal. The way her breath hitched slightly when their skin touched, the way his heartbeat stuttered every time her golden eyes locked onto his. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to steady his thoughts. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked away for a moment, as if searching for an answer she didn't have. Then she finally spoke. "We find out together." And just like that, the night no longer felt quite as lonely. The days blurred together, yet each moment with her felt etched into his very soul. Time had lost meaning since their bond was formed, since the poison that had once threatened his life had been replaced by something far more consuming, something alive, something that pulsed between them like a second heartbeat. They traveled together now, moving through forests that felt untouched by time, through landscapes that whispered of ancient secrets. The world felt different in her presence. Colors sharper, sounds richer. The air itself charged with an energy that had not been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and he was only now awakening to it. She walked beside him, her movements fluid, her body swaying with an effortless grace that made it impossible to look away. The fabric that clung to her form shimmered with every step, shifting between deep blues and silvers, as if woven from the very stars themselves. And the pull between them only grew stronger. He felt her before she even spoke, before she even moved. A warmth beneath his skin, a presence inside his mind. It wasn't invasive. If anything, it was comforting, like a part of him that had always been missing. But the connection also came with something deeper, something dangerous. He had seen the way she hesitated when their hands brushed, the way her breath would catch when his gaze lingered on her lips. She was feeling it too, and yet she fought it. "I don't understand," he said one night, as they sat beneath a sky littered with galaxies. "You saved me. You bound us together. Why do you resist it?" She didn't answer at first. The firelight flickered across her skin, casting shadows along her delicate features, making her look both ethereal and untouchable. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet. "Because it was never meant to happen." His chest tightened. "But it did." She exhaled slowly, her fingers curling into the fabric of her garment. "My kind does not bond with humans." She turned to face him, her golden eyes glowing in the dim light. We do not feel as you do. He frowned. That's not true. A flicker of something passed over her expression. It should be. Silence stretched between them. The air felt heavier, charged. He could sense the war inside her, the way her body responded to his presence, the way she leaned toward him before pulling away. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing over hers. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as the bond between them flared to life, crackling like a flame caught in the wind. Her pulse pounded beneath his fingertips, her breath shuddering. "Tell me you don't feel it," he murmured. Her eyes darkened. "I feel everything." "Then why are you afraid?" The question lingered on his tongue, but he already knew the answer. Because this was unknown. Because this was impossible. Because she had never meant for this bond to form, and now they were standing on the edge of something neither of them could control. He didn't pull away, neither did she. Instead, he traced his thumb along the inside of her wrist, watching the way her lips parted, the way her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. It was intoxicating, the way she responded to him, the way her body betrayed the very words she spoke. "Let me in," he whispered. She shuddered. "I already have." Then the distance between them disappeared. Her lips met his in a rush of warmth and desperation, a clash of need and surrender. The moment their mouths touched, the bond between them flared to life, wrapping around them like an unseen force, tightening, deepening. She tasted like something forbidden, something untamed, like the night sky and the electric charge of a storm. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, as if she could not stand the space between them. And he was lost in her, in the way her body molded against his, in the way their souls intertwined like vines reaching for the same light. It wasn't just a kiss. It was something far greater, a claiming, a completion of what had already begun the moment she had saved his life. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his, her breath uneven. "This should not have happened," she whispered. He cupped her face, tilting it so she had no choice but to look at him. "Then tell me to stop." Her silence was answer enough, because she couldn't, because neither of them could. And in that moment he knew whatever this was, whatever they had become, there was no turning back. The night stretched around them, heavy with the weight of what they had done, what they had become. She lay beside him, her body still pressed against his, the warmth of her skin seared into his memory. The bond between them hummed with a quiet intensity, no longer restrained, no longer fought. Yet, even in the silence, he could feel the tension in her. She traced slow circles against his chest, her golden eyes distant. "They will come for me soon," she murmured. His muscles tensed. "Who?" "My kind." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the sorrow woven beneath it. "They will have sensed the bond. They will come to sever it." His fingers tightened around her wrist. "What happens if they do?" She hesitated. "The connection will break. You will go back to the way you were before." The words sent a chill through him. He couldn't imagine it, not after everything. Not after feeling her presence inside him, as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. The thought of losing her, of returning to the emptiness he hadn't even realized he'd had before her, was unbearable. "No," he said firmly. "I won't let that happen." She sat up, the moonlight casting silver across her skin. "You don't understand. They will not ask. They will take it from us. They will erase me from you." His breath hitched. "Erase." She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "You will forget me." The ground seemed to shift beneath him. He reached for her, pulling her close, as if holding her tighter could stop the inevitable. "There has to be another way." She shook her head. "If I run, they will hunt me. If I stay, they will take me." She exhaled shakily. "Either way, this ends." A deep, aching pain bloomed in his chest, worse than any poison, worse than anything he had ever known. "I don't accept that." His voice was raw, desperate. "We fight." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "You are only human." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. Then I will defy the gods themselves if it means keeping you. A shiver passed through her, and for a brief moment, hope flickered in her gaze. Then, as if she had already accepted what he refused to, she leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss against his lips. It was different this time, not burning, not desperate, just final. A whisper of wind stirred the trees. A shift in the air. She pulled away. They're here. His heart pounded. He turned, searching the darkness, and then he saw them. Figures moving through the trees, glowing like phantoms, their presence unnatural, suffocating. He grabbed her hand. Run. She didn't move. The air thickened, and suddenly, they were surrounded. Tall, otherworldly beings emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing with the same golden fire as hers. But there was no warmth in their gazes, only cold judgment. One stepped forward, taller than the rest, his voice deep and absolute. You have broken the laws of our kind. She stood, her chin lifted. I saved him. The figure's gaze shifted to him, unreadable. And in doing so, you have tethered yourself to a mortal. A mistake that must be undone. Panic clawed at his throat. No, he stepped in front of her, shielding her. You can't take this from us. The being tilted his head, almost curious. You do not understand, human. This was never meant to be. But it is, he growled. And I won't let you take her. A faint sigh, almost pitying. You have no choice. The air crackled. A surge of invisible energy wrapped around them, pulling them apart. He reached for her, but his limbs wouldn't move. He could only watch as she gasped, as her body trembled against the force dragging her away. No! His voice broke, raw with desperation. Don't do this. Her eyes locked onto his, wide with fear. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then pain. A searing, unbearable pain tore through him. His vision blurred. His mind fragmented. And then, nothing. He awoke alone. The forest was silent. The air was still. There was no sign of them. No sign of her. His head ached, his chest hollow, as if something had been ripped from him. He pressed a hand to his heart, trying to remember, trying to grasp at the fading echoes of something. Someone important. But the more he reached, the further it slipped away. The pain in his chest sharpened. He didn't know why. He didn't know what he had lost. All he knew was that something was missing, something that had once made him whole. And no matter how hard he tried to recall, he could never remember her name,